Hello, friends. Welcome to Story Time with Uncle Eric. What I'm going to read today, this is going to be my first official video after the introduction video that I made. But this particular video, the very first one, is going to be something I found in the hot sheets many years ago. As a matter of fact, it was back in the 1990s. For those of you who do not know what the hot sheets are, it was described in the original 1997 movie Men in Black by Tommy Lee Jones. The hot sheets, basically supermarket tabloids. And supermarket tabloids, they put stuff that's 100% true right next to something that's 100% nonsense, or something that's half true and half nonsense. And if you don't already know the story, well, then chances are you're going to think it's all nonsense. But the hot sheets were created so they could put accurate information in less than reputable sources. And that was said on a movie that came out in 1994 called The Roswell Cover-Up. And it had actually he was the country music star at that time, Dwight Yoakam. And him and some other more well-named actors were in there. One of them was Martin Sheen, who basically, you could see him throughout the movie, didn't say anything, and at the end of the movie, he came in and basically told the story. Well, towards the end of that movie, they had a group that was created. Basically, it was what we all know today as the enigmatic Majestic 12. And they decided to have basically a meeting of the minds, a round table, so to speak. And, what are we going to do about situations like this? Like how are we going to control leaks was one of the things topics that came up. How are we going to control leaks? Someone's bound to talk. And they said, well, as long as we control how the information is leaked, it might not hurt us. For one, people that go out here and deliberately stage hoaxes, muddy the waters. So after a while, people don't want to believe it. Even if they do see the real thing, they think it's just another staged hoax. The other one was release accurate information in less than reputable sources. That was the birth of the supermarket tabloids. Things that put just stories that sound so ridiculous that people aren't going to believe them. But I myself have seen over the years stories of things that actually happened that were in mainstream news publications, also made the supermarket tabloids. And one of them, actually, the guy was on a talk show. I don't know if the feller still has his talk show or not, but it was Mr. Montel Williams was his name. And he had his own talk show. And the thing that was in the supermarket tabloid, as well as was in regular newspapers, actually made the Montel Williams show. So just because it's in a supermarket tabloid does not mean that it's a phony story. And just because it's in regular mainstream news publications doesn't mean it's a real story. Because you'll see things in regular mainstream news publications where an event happened, but they're like, the way it was described by the commentator or the reporter, like, that ain't how it happened, or that's not what they said. I know. I've seen it happen for myself. One of them actually happened to me years ago, back in 1989. One newspaper got it right about what I said, and another one, that ain't what I said. That was mainstream with the cameras and the microphones right there, and they reported that I said something that I didn't say. So, all that aside, we're going to start very first video, Story Time with Uncle Eric. What this has to do with, we've all heard of the legendary 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, which was depicted in the Bible. And depending on who you talk to, or depending on who's writing about it, you find that some of the horsemen have different names. Yeah, there was like 4 names, but you have revisionists that rewrite and rewrite and rewrite, and you're like, what the hell is this supposed to be? Well, everything that I have read, I come to my own conclusions. I'm allowed to do that, just as you are. And I have come to the conclusion that the depicted apocalyptic horsemen were supposed to be representing how basically mankind, humankind, destroyed themselves. One of them was called Conquest. And depending on who's writing the article or showing the picture, it's either a white or a gray horse. Conquest, always wanting to conquer somebody else. You read any history book out here, somebody, some country, or even, small time, organized crime, street gang, motorcycle group, all that kind of stuff. Somebody's always trying to conquer somebody else with that mentality. They want to be in control. It makes sense. Another apocalyptic horseman was called War. Wars have existed for as long as anybody can remember, and a war was supposed to be represented by a red horse. Makes perfect sense. War, destruction of humanity, mankind, everything around it. War makes perfect sense. And then you had one, and I've heard at least 3 different names, was the horseman they call Pestilence. Also has been called Famine, also has been called Plague. We've heard, famines, disease, starvation, like the Dust Bowls of the 30s where the ground dried up and blew away, and, the soil, you couldn't even plant anything anymore. The Dust Bowls, no rain, which has happened out on the West Coast for a number of years. Every now and then they get bombarded with rain. Then they'll go 8 years of drought, where, crops are drying up and blowing away, no rain at all. Water, down, the water tables down below the soil have been polluted with so much pesticides. An old man told me years ago that every year there's like 800 million metric tons of pesticides put in the soil out there, and now the water tables are poisoned. There's more mercury coming out of a faucet than they have in a thermometer. Yeah, food being grown in toxic soil out there. And the California climate, hell, they can harvest 7 or 8 crops a year. Out here in the Midwest, usually it's 1. But the California climate, you can grow 7, 8 crops a year, and they want to put it all under concrete. Okay, you got countries in this world, whole entire geographical areas, everybody's starving. They can't find food, but they can go through the act to reproduce new people, babies. Got skin hanging off their bones, yet they're still doing that. They don't have hardly any energy to walk, but they can still do that. Plagues, famine, pestilence, that's the horseman that had the scales. And then they had death. Okay, death would follow. All these ways that mankind or humankind are destroying themselves and everything around them makes sense. However, there is a legend that there was a 5th horseman that was removed from the depictions of the apocalyptic horseman around 15 AD, before the dawn of what we call Christianity. And I've heard 3 different names of that particular legendary 5th horseman, and only one of them makes sense of why that 5th horseman was removed. One of the things I read said the 5th horseman was called Chaos. And depending on who you ask, some people say that it rode a green stallion or steed, and others say it rode a brown one. Chaos. Chaos makes sense. All the riots and just the absolute, self-destruction, big time in the cities, but you see it in the smaller areas too. Mostly in the big cities, you got people of every kind of idiotic mentality you can think of, disengage and not only destroying themselves, but destroying everything around them. It makes sense. But why would that fifth horseman called chaos, which would represent, part of the destruction of mankind, been removed? Doesn't make any sense. The other one was called Providence. Providence was depicted as a female and was supposed to represent the way people overcame all this bitterness, all this hatred, all this self-destruction, and gave people hope for humanity, that we would put all of that aside, even those in the powers that be, put it all aside, and people would be able to get along, peace, harmony, coexist, no more violence, no more vile behavior, none of that. Okay, but if that was indeed the case, then why would Providence have been removed? It doesn't make any sense. Well, back in the 1990s, I found an article in the Hot Sheets, supermarket tabloids. It had a story here that makes perfect sense as to why the fifth horseman of the apocalypse was removed from the images of the apocalyptic horseman, which was before the birth of Christ, before Christianity as we know it came into existence. Images of this legendary fifth horseman of the apocalypse, that according to this one particular doctor, professor, whatever you want to call him, researcher, what this individual discovered back in 1978. Now, this story was in 1995, but according to the story, years plus or minus, was back in the 70s that this professor discovered this. And he's like, what? We've always heard there was only 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, but this professor, doctor, researcher, whatever you want to call him, found that there was a 5th horseman. And what this 5th horseman represented is exactly what we are seeing today in 2023, and for some years. We get it shoved in our eyes and out our six every damn day. You turn around, we are seeing these images. And because of political correctness, you can't say this, you can't say that. Free speech be damned. According to those who always want to push this politically correct, or what I call liberal approved, or leftist approved mentality. I am going to read you the entire story I found in this article that was in the Hot Sheets back in the late 1990s. You decide for yourself. Is this story more likely the reason that the legendary 5th horseman of the apocalypse was removed, or not? Because there was no reason to move an apocalyptic horseman called chaos that represented self-destruction, riots, and that kind of thing. Wouldn't be no reason to remove that one. There would be no reason to remove Providence. Hope that mankind would be able to save themselves and knock off all this nonsense that they've been doing for as long as people have been around. Always self-destructing, always got to conquer somebody else. Poisoning the food supply, poisoning the water supply, poisoning baby food, doing all these self-destructing things. It would make no sense to remove Providence. Providence representing mankind or humankind saving themselves and just getting rid of all the BS that's being so self-destructive. It would make no sense to get rid of Providence. But what I'm about to read you makes more sense. And because if they had what they may have referred to, or probably a different terminology, political correctness back then, like we've had it today, jammed in our ear and out our six today, 2023, and for many years now, this politically correct, leftist approved. It would make more sense today to have the 5th horseman removed back then. And now I'm going to read you what I found. I'm going to read you the entire story then you decide for yourself if it really made sense, if political correctness back then was so in control like it is today, why the legendary fifth horseman of the apocalypse would have been removed. Story time with Uncle Eric. This says, expert finds fifth horseman of the apocalypse, a gay man who rides side saddle like a girl. I may put my own emphasis here from time to time, may, but I'm going to read it to you verbatim. I may end up putting in my emphasis later on, but I'm going to read you verbatim, word for word, what this article says. This is by Lisa Maracas from Weekly World News, one of the hot sheets. Stuttgart, Germany. An expert in ancient Hebrew literature and art says he has uncovered evidence that there was a fifth horseman of the apocalypse, a gay man who rode side saddle like a girl. Basically, what the good professor was saying was it was what we would call today a drag queen. Okay? What we today would call a drag queen, which we see everywhere, YouTube, social media, all over, all these drag queens, it would make sense. The fifth horseman rode side saddle, was supposed to be a guy. Doesn't say woman, it was a guy. But it was a drag queen. But he used the terminology of his time. And like I say, I'm reading verbatim. This is the language they used to write this article. I'm not making this up. This is the language they used. If you find it offensive, I could care less. The sissy horseman was incorporated into early literary description of the riders of the apocalypse and was clearly depicted in murals and mosaics created before the dawn of Christianity. According to Dr. Heinrich Pfeffenstamp, the horseman rode a brown steed and wore fluffy robes and jewelry. The other four horsemen are Death, who rides a pale horse, Famine, who rides a black horse, War, who rides a red horse, and Deliverance, who rides a gray horse. Now, that is another term, deliverance. And like I say, I've also heard the term conquest. Conquest and deliverance. Because I hear the word deliverance, I think of a movie from about 50 years ago. So, let's see, where am I? And Deliverance, who rides a gray horse. The professor told an international conference on ancient religions. So this would have been before Christianity, talking about ancient religions. The fifth rider, this was the name of the legendary fifth horseman of the apocalypse according to this article. The fifth rider was named Perversion. Perversion was the name of the fifth horseman, and it makes sense today. Now I'm going to read it verbatim. The fifth rider, Perversion, was one of the group until Christianity came along to stress loving forgiveness of people with afflictions like homosexuality. At that point, he disappeared from the allegory altogether. Dr. Pfeffenstamp, 67, says he became curious about the fifth horseman in 1978 while he was in Israel researching early Hebraic civilization. The horsemen of the apocalypse were commonly featured in writing and art, but almost always there was a fifth figure included in the early works. When I first saw mosaics showing Perversion in the group, I thought the figure was female, Dr. Pfeffenstamp said, but literary descriptions referred to the fifth horseman as a male and was clearly indicated he was homosexual. Perversion was considered to be the figure that represented sexual excess and moral decay. He was much feared because he was thought to destroy families and communities and deprived people of the chance of going to heaven, in ancient art and representations of perversion. The fifth horseman was shown riding side saddle between famine and war. He carried a purse or satchel in his right hand and was usually depicted wearing garish makeup. Ancient writings reported sightings of the figure following wild orgies or in the vicinity of brothels, and he was considered to represent a grave threat to the faithful. At one time, it was clear he was thought of as one of the most powerful and destructive of the horsemen of the apocalypse, Dr. Pfeffenstamp said. That's what makes it interesting that he dropped out from sight so suddenly. Obviously, at some point in the early stages of Christianity, it became politically incorrect to express harsh views of homosexuals, and the fifth horseman became an embarrassment. After about 15 AD, perversion is never seen again. Well, that's what we have today, friends. If you decide to criticize people with that lifestyle, or I call that mental disorder, I mean, guys that want to dress up as ladies and pawn themselves off as gals, and then go to establishments and try and deliberately pick up on guys that they know are straight and try and maybe turn them gay. I've met one I knew when I was in the service, the other guy I met. Two different people I've talked to picked up or tried to pick up on individuals they thought were drop dead gorgeous gals. And then they got a rude awakening when they found out that they weren't what they appeared to be. I'll spare the details. But so many of these drag queens we see today, that are being pushed in the schools. And a lot of these companies are inviting these drag queens in to represent their companies. We're seeing it in schools all the time. That moron Dylan Mulvaney, mental disorder extraordinaire. All this we're seeing today. Been seeing for some time. Drags have been around for a long time, but we've never seen it been pushed like we have today. And because, you can't, talk smack about somebody because their lifestyle or their chosen philosophy or blah, blah, blah. Unless you happen to look like me and you identify yourself as a conspiracy theorist, my pronouns are I told you so. Or if you happen to have white skin and you believe in self-preservation, that automatically makes you an evil hate monger and bigot and all these other usual words they like to describe people like me as, with my color skin. But you just can't go after somebody because they're gay or whatever terminology they're calling themselves. When they went after the Boy Scouts back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, because the Boy Scouts were tired of being raped by these gay scoutmasters. And Hollywood and a lot of individuals came down on the Boy Scouts. They ruined an awesome institution that helped teach young boys how to become men. And the LBGTWTFRU group basically destroyed the Boy Scouts. But all that aside, that story that I just read you makes more sense. It makes more sense that legendary fifth horseman who is called perversion would have been removed, because it makes no sense if that fifth horseman was called chaos and represented self-destruction, riots, and that kind of thing. Makes no sense that character would have been removed, that horseman would have been removed, because it falls in line with the others: war, conquest, famine, followed by death. Providence, the one depicted as a female who represented, the hope that mankind or humankind would overcome all this self-destruction, and there was a great hope one day we could all live in peace and harmony and that kind of thing. Why remove that horseman or horsewoman? The great hope. It makes no sense to have that particular horse rider removed. But perversion and the political correct, or what should I say, leftist approved world we live in today, and have for some time, unfortunately, it would make sense believing, oh, forgive, 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 forgive. Well, then, under those circumstances, it would make sense that perversion was removed around 15 AD and was never seen again. But I'll tell you this, it makes sense that the fifth horseman would have been called perversion. Look at the world we live in today in 2023. If you have unfortunately, if you want your credit card linked to such things, about 15, 16 years ago on a morning drive show, Bob and Tom, based out of Indianapolis, there was a trivia question. At that time, now today's 2023, I heard this in the earlier part of this century. And it said, how many adult websites are there? Adult websites generally refers to pornographic depictions, whether it be soft, hard, or the most unspeakable, vile depictions ever created by the human or subhuman consciousness. And the answer was, at least at that time, there was 8 million separate, distinctive websites, adult websites, from soft, hardcore, bestiality, necrophilia, cannibalism, and other things that I'll spare you the details from right now. But you've heard me say when I was on Dark Outpost, in various segments I was on, and I mentioned some of these things that can be found today on a site called the Urban Dictionary. Activities that people actually willfully engage in that the average human consciousness just can't even imagine the depravity that goes on. But now it slowly but surely is being pushed and pushed and pushed. So it would make sense that perversion would have been removed, because we see in today's world that the apocalyptic horseman perversion and what that apocalyptic horseman represents is definitely self-destructive to any society that it slithers into. Now I'm going to upload this video and I'm going to get on to my woodcutting. So I hope you enjoyed this. This is the first installment of my new video series called Storytime with Uncle Eric. Storytime with Uncle Eric. If any of you have any suggestions of things that you would like me to read from, please send it. I will try to get it if I don't already have it, and I hope that you enjoy. I might not be the most articulate out there, and sometimes I stutter, or I misspeak, which I already know. But anyway, I hope that I can keep you folks, if not informed, at least entertained. I intend to do at least one video a week, and sometimes I will do more than one video a week, and it depends on really the time that I have and the energy that I have to do it. Thank you for listening, friends. This is Eric the Mind Control Guy, and thank you for stopping by with Story Time with Uncle Eric. Thank you.